Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais commencer par dire que je vais appuyer ce projet de loi pour qu'il soit envoyé en comité. C-37 propose de modifier les dispositions du Code criminel portant sur les suramendes compensatoires pour les victimes, donc l'article 737, afin de doubler le montant que les contrevenants doivent payer lorsqu'ils reçoivent leur sentence et rendre la suramende obligatoire pour tous les contrevenants. Cette suramende est imposée au moment de la détermination de la peine aux contrevenants déclarés coupables et elle sert à financer des programmes et des services à l'intention des victimes d'actes criminels dans la province ou le territoire où l'acte criminel a été commis. Le Code criminel exige que le juge impose une suramende compensatoire dans tous les cas, mais il dispose actuellement d'un pouvoir discrétionnaire si le délinquant peut démontrer que ça causera un préjudice injustifié à lui ou aux personnes à sa charge. Donc, si le tribunal décide de ne pas imposer une suramende fédérale maintenant, il doit justifier sa décision et consigner ses motifs dans le registre des délibérations. Je suis en faveur de meilleur financement pour les programmes des victimes. Some stats, on May 27, 2010, 729 victim service agencies in Canada reported serving nearly 9,500 clients on that day. And Mr. Speaker, it's worth noting that 3/4 of them were women. Of those victims who received services, 81% said that they were the victim of a violent crime. Les types d'aides les plus souvent assurés directement par les fournisseurs de services aux victimes au Québec, c'est en 2009-2010, comprenaient l'orientation ou l'information liée aux tribunaux, l'accompagnement devant les tribunaux, l'information sur les processus et la structure du système de justice pénale et la préparation des victimes ou des témoins, et également l'aide pour les demandes d'indemnité. So I think it's clear that helping victims of crime is costly. We need to devote more to those who are suffering after a violent crime has been done, or any crime has been done to them or to their family. So, Mr. Speaker, although I do support the essence of this bill, and I agree that a larger levy on victim services is in general a good idea. It will help us contribute more to victims. I do have some concerns, and I hope that the committee will examine closely this bill. For instance, the provincial programs that will be funded by this increased surcharge are essential. They need the support. There's not enough victim support services in the provinces. People who are the victims of crime often require psychological, social support during and after the legal process. So I do approve of this. Mr. Speaker, that those who commit the crimes be forced to invest in the programming that will help heal, not only for specific victims, but for those who are similarly in need is quite appropriate, I think. But I want to call attention to the fact that the most glaring example of underserviced demographic of victims is the families of missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Yesterday, Ottawa had a strong show of solidarity with the families who have lost daughters, mothers, sisters, wives to horrible violence and unsolved disappearances. Hardworking group called Families of Sisters in the Spirit organized a massive vigil on Parliament Hill yesterday, and their message was very strong and clear. Hundreds of women who have been taken will not be forgotten, and families and allies will not rest until the government recognizes their responsibility to these victims and to Aboriginal women across the country who remain in danger. Some of the saddest stories we heard on the Hill yesterday were about the cases where crimes were not thoroughly investigated for months and sometimes years. The stories where the victims of crime had to take it upon themselves to investigate the disappearances of their own loved ones because they couldn't get access to the services they needed. And one of the repercussions of this phenomenon of disproportionately unsolved murders is that the families were told they could not receive victim services until the cases were solved. If no one's solving the cases, then unfortunately, these families are left to themselves entirely. When it comes to Aboriginal women, it's not just the victims of kidnapping and murder that badly need the victim services. It's the families, it's the communities. We really need to be investing in prevention. An Aboriginal woman is 5 times as likely as a non-Aboriginal woman to be the victim of a violent crime. And this is mostly due to extreme rates of poverty, which have over 40% of Aboriginal women are living below the poverty line. These women have a shameful lack of access to police services, legal services, shelters, psychiatrists, let alone provincial victim services. So we do need better and more effective victim services, and you know, if we can do something in this House to increase those kinds of services to those who need it, and especially I think we need to be thinking about increased funding to First Nations, Métis and Inuit communities, both on and off reserve. Ce projet de loi va aussi éliminer la possibilité pour un tribunal de lever la suramende compensatoire si le contrevenant démontre que le paiement de cette suramende lui causerait ou causerait aux personnes à sa charge un préjudice injustifié. Et les juges ont le pouvoir discrétionnaire actuellement d'ordonner le versement d'une suramende compensatoire plus élevée ou de la laisser aller. So we do have one concern over here on this side of the House. That's the judicial power of discretion, and this discretionary power that allows judges to waive the surcharge for criminals for whom it would cause undue harm to them or to their families, mostly to their families, of course, is important for people who have committed crimes but who are very poor. Poverty is often the root cause of crime, and financially crippling this person on top of sentencing them can make it impossible for them to rehabilitate, for their children to properly integrate into society, etc. So the withdrawal of the clause of undue hardship, and the provision seeking to double the surcharge amount would be problematic for low-income offenders. Some statistics about who a lot of these people are. 80% of all federally sentenced women report having been physically or sexually abused, and this rises to 90% when we're talking about Aboriginal women. 2/3 of federally sentenced women are mothers, and they are more likely than men to have primary child care responsibilities. There are about 25,000 children whose mothers are either in federal prisons or provincial jails, and that was from last year. So separation from their children and the inability to deal with problems concerning them are major anxieties for women in prison. And obviously, if poverty is a contributing factor, then you can imagine the situation for these families. Imprisoned women also have much lower employment rates than incarcerated men. And not only do women experience much more poverty than men do, most criminalized women have low levels of education. They have limited employment and economic records, and usually live alone in extremely poor housing conditions. In the Prairie region, most of the women in prison are Indigenous, contributing to a situation where they represent 85% of the population of women prisoners. And as I said earlier, these are people who are living in poverty, who are already not getting access to social services. They're experiencing a lack of access to health care, a lack of access to education and social services. So I think when we're talking about the judicial discretion, I think that's something that needs to be examined much more closely. If it's being used often, there may be because we need to be looking at more prevention. We need to be looking at more help to those on the ground who are living in poverty and may end up becoming criminals in the future. And I think that we really do need to be concentrating more on prevention, as much as I will vote for this vote to bring this bill to committee in order to examine it further, because I agree that we should be funding more for victims' services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires? Questions and comments? L'honorable député de Gaspésie, Île-de-la-Madeleine.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Puis j'aimerais remercier ma collègue d'Argenteuil pour son intervention. Je pense que c'était très apprécié et très renseignant. Je veux poser une question, juste souligner la discrétion qu'on accorde en ce moment aux juges quant aux pénalités, quant aux sentences, quant aux amendes, que ce projet de loi finalement éliminerait. Puis je me demandais si la députée pourrait commenter un petit peu plus sur cette question. Merci.
L'honorable député d'Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel.
So this was a recommendation made to the government based on the fact that it was found that often judges were using their discretionary power to waive the fee, and I believe, frankly, that we really need to look at why that is. Yes, judges are human. They're going to see things differently. We're not always going to apply the law perfectly unless you tighten someone into a box and sort of, force it, make it mandatory. But if it's being invoked often, the problem is more likely the fact that we're looking at a lot of people who are living in poverty, who are in situations where they become criminals. And we need to look at addressing that problem before we start taking away the discretionary power of judges who are trying to really help those in society. As I said, many of those people, or many of those women, will be mothers who have dependents, and if they are unable to pay, we're creating more victims, in a sense. Thank you.
Comments, questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Saint-Bruno-Saint-Hiver.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie ma collègue pour son témoignage. C'est une fille vraiment très brave et très intelligente. Je trouvais très pertinent son témoignage. Comme on sait tous, ce projet de loi est une promesse électorale que les conservateurs ont fait durant leurs dernières élections. Et les conservateurs veulent montrer au monde qu'ils veulent protéger plus les victimes et les familles. Mais nous savons que tout le monde ici est pour une justice et veulent avoir un milieu sécuritaire. Mais il y a quelque chose qui me préoccupe, c'est qu'en enlevant le pouvoir discrétionnaire du juge de lever la suramende, j'aimerais poser la question à ma collègue. Quelles seraient les répercussions, surtout sur les autochtones qui n'ont pas les moyens de payer ces suramendes?
Bonne question.
L'honorable député de Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel.
Je remercie ma collègue de Saint-Bruno-Saint-Hubert pour sa question. C'est vraiment pertinent. Je pense qu'un projet de loi comme celui-ci doit aller avec la prévention et le gouvernement fédéral a besoin de comprendre qu'ils sont responsables pour les Premières Nations, les Inuits, les Autochtones. Actuellement, on dirait qu'ils ne comprennent pas qu'ils sont responsables et on a vraiment besoin de donner des services. On a besoin de donner plus accès à l'éducation qui est that's culturally relevant. Et c'est comme ça qu'on va être capable de prévenir qu'on a moins de victimes dans le futur. Comme j'ai dit, je pense qu'il faut que ça va avec plus de financement pour les victimes. C'est sûr qu'il va toujours avoir des victimes, mais est-ce qu'on peut en avoir moins? Je pense que oui. Je pense qu'on devrait mettre plus d'efforts là-dedans aussi.